Hi, this is Zach with Worn&Wound, and today I'll be reviewing the Melbourne Sorrento. This is a new watch from Melbourne, who is a brand we've taken a look at several times before. Big fan of what they do, based in Australia, as the name will obviously indicate. They've been making some really nice affordable watches for the last few years with unique designs that stand out, I think, a little bit from the crowd. They're a little bit more on the dressy side, a little bit refined, but they moreover just have their own aesthetic, which I think is the most important from one of the new micro brands. So this watch, the Sorrento, is their first kind of beefy dive watch, if you will, and it draws a little bit on their previous Port C collection in the dial, which is a collection that I was in particular a big fan of. It had this layered dial that used a ceramic disc, very, very cool looking watch, very elegant. And so this takes it and then puts it in this much heavier duty case with this bezel here, which is an interesting bezel with a double layer construction. It's powered by a Miyota 9015, and it will retail for $842. That's converted to US, but is on sale currently for pre-order for $612. So there is substantial savings there. So yeah, let's take a closer look. The case of the Sorrento actually has not crazy proportions in terms of size, but it is a very beefy watch. So it's 42 millimeters in diameter, which I think is a totally respectable size for a slightly larger dive watch, with a 49 millimeter lug to lug, also fairly tame, not small, but tame, but it is 14 millimeters tall. So that's where you get really a lot of the kind of heft, beefiness of the watch from, which when we show from the side, you really see how heavy and tall the bezel is, etc. So looking from the top, it's a very kind of classic design, very masculine, very massive lugs here that taper in. They're very fat, so it gives it a very kind of a wide shape to it. That just gives it a lot of wrist presence. It makes it very, heavy duty, but I think it's still an elegant design. And then you have this bezel here. So it's a 120 click bezel, fairly standard. It is unidirectional, so it doesn't go back. But what's interesting is really the insert. So it is an aluminum insert that has been engraved with a waveform pattern, and then is over an enamel disc here. So the white you're seeing there is then enamel. It has a very interesting look to it, a little bit ornate, but I feel like it goes with this style that Melbourne is going for here. It's not, completely kind of unaestheticized tool watch. Rather, it is a little bit dressed up, a little bit elegant, definitely speaks to their line. It's kind of like an office tool diver, desk diver kind of a thing or something, if you will. But it is an attractive look and definitely something that, doesn't immediately bring other watches to mind. And then the cutouts here have a kind of a vintage feel to them. I like that there's no numerals there. Honestly, it keeps it very clean. Looking at the Sorrento from the side, you can see the height more. So the bezel is really very tall. It's like 4 millimeters there, deep teeth there. That is obviously adding a lot to the overall height. The mid case is, about what you'd expect for a tool dive watch, though. A few millimeters thick, slab sides with vertical brushing. On the right side, you do have crown guards here that, obviously protect the crown. I think that also adds to the overall heft of the design. The crown is 6 by 4 millimeters, screwed down, obviously. It's a fairly classic design, nothing really particularly stands out there. Looking a little bit at the finishing, like I said, brushed here, but it's polished along the sides, so you do have that mix. I think, I might prefer my dive watches to be brushed or matte all over, but like I said before, this is sort of a dressed up dive watch, so having the polish on the bezel does kind of speak to that. Looking now at the case back of the Sorrento, you have this deeply stamped, like sculptural kind of graphic of a vintage, dive outfit equipment. It's a motif you definitely see on a lot of dive watches, but it is always very cool. I really like that Melbourne does this, and they've done this on their other watches where they do these very deeply stamped reliefs. I think it adds a lot of at least perceived value to a watch. Visually, it's very pleasing. It's nice when you take a watch off to have this kind of little extra bit of art that's maybe just for you, the owner, since obviously you don't see it when it's on your wrist. Otherwise, very simple design. Case back is held on by 4 screws. And actually one interesting thing you can see here, which is a little uncommon, is that the bracelet itself is actually held on by double-sided quick release spring bars. So I've actually never seen that on a bracelet before. That definitely can help somebody who's not as well versed using strap changing tools to get that off. So that is a nice touch. Looking now at the dial of the Sorrento, it's very layered and textured. And like I said, it draws from their Port C models, which are very cool for the same reason. They use this a surface, a layer above in ceramic, and then another layer for a chapter ring. So there's really quite a lot of depth. And here they went and added an additional textural element in the form of applied or at least surrounded markers. So looking at it now in just terms of the different surfaces, you have a bottom surface here in the center, and that is sort of basically a matte. It might be a little bit shinier than matte, dark blue. It's a very attractive blue. It's not a very in your face. It's kind of an inky navy color. I happen to like it for a blue quite a lot, and that has these textural horizontal lines here. Maybe that speaks a little bit to some classic luxury sport watches. You can figure out which ones, but the overall look is so far from them. I don't think it's trying to ape them in any way, and it's nice to have that texture there. Then you have this layer up, which is a ceramic disc. So that has a sheen to it. It's fully gloss, and that's a very cool feature. The one thing I would complain about is that the color feels a little off to me there, and I don't know if it was trying not to match to add a little contrast, or if it's just hard to match those two materials. But here it feels a little green, so it's not quite the same blue, and that just visually is a little disruptive to me. On that disc, then you have like the primary index, and that consists of these small lume sort of dots with steel surrounds or silver surrounds, and then 3 larger, applied markers that are rectangular for a 369. I quite like the large rectangular ones at 369. I like how they overhang. That's cool how it kind of bridges the gap between the ceramic disc and the inner area, but they make the other ones feel a little bit small to me. Those kind of remind me actually a little bit of what you'd see on the kind of modern Blancpain bathyscaphe, which had these little marks that are in the surround, and that gives it almost a look of like a set stone of some kind. Not my favorite look, I won't lie. I kind of wish they were a little bit bigger, a little bit more just true to the original, like a classic dive concept. And at 12, they have a double dot that, to me, this area at 12 just feels a little too open. I really am wanting for either another rectangle up there or another marker of equal weight, even a large circle or something, just to kind of complete that. That would have felt a little bit just more well thought out to me. Next layer you have then is a chapter ring. Also in blue. It's a step up, a thin step up, but once again, it's nice to have that layering. That has numerals at intervals of 5 and white markers in between them. Obviously, use it for minutes, seconds, add some legibility. And that's the only kind of area of numerals on the whole dial. So that is kind of where you're maybe drawing a little bit more sportiness from, but obviously it's very limited, very reserved. But I think it looks good. Had they not had that, this might have felt a little bit too strange of a concept, a little bit too far towards a dress diver, like too much dress, not enough diver, if you will. Looking now at the hands, I quite like the hand set they went with here. It's very unique. So the hour and minute hands are both kind of almost a coffin shape, if you will. They're widest at the center point, tapering a little bit behind, and then tapering down to a blunted tip at the front. There's a bunch of little facets and angles on them, very nice looking, and there's a mix of finishing. So the sides of the hands are matte or brushed, and then the center has a polished line, and then there's a lume strip within that polished line. So there's quite a lot going on there. Picks up light really nicely. I like that it's not a classic or standard handset type, because I feel like nothing else on this feels too much like a, kind of an archetypal dive watch design, even though there's elements there that are familiar. So this is kind of its own concept, which is great. And they just work with the watch. They're not too big or too small or anything like that. The second hand then, thin seconds hand with a square lume pip and a Melbourne M at the back. Very understated, very simple. Not much to say there, other than it works. Looking at the Sorrento on the wrist, though it is a tall, beefy watch, I think it fits quite well. This is, I think it's a good size for a slightly larger watch for my wrist, which is 7 inches. There's no overhang on the lugs. I don't think the diameter is too absurd. It's definitely tall. Like I said, that's something you will notice. So it has that kind of, heft on top of your wrist. But that is what they're going for here. They're going for this beefy diver combination with something more elegant in dress. On the wrist, though, I think it is an attractive watch for sure. It's an interesting design. I mean, I'd have to say I haven't really worn many beefy dive watches that also have these other aesthetic, like kind of dressy elements. Usually they're just very aggressive. Here it doesn't feel aggressive to me. I think things like the textural element on the aluminum is it's very elegant actually, and it's something you would see maybe on a fixed bezel of some kind just as a decorative element, but then the white enamel comes through and gives you those markers that speak towards dive language, and then you have that layering on the dial and the blue. And, it's attractive. It's definitely fun to look at. Aesthetically, I think it is for somebody who wants to wear like a bigger watch, but wants to wear it, more to the office. Not that you can't wear a sport watch to the office or whatever, but this is definitely something that I think is a little bit more inclined towards kind of fitting in. It's sort of a chameleon of a watch, if you will. Looking now at the bracelet, so it has a 22 millimeter lug here, and it comes on a heavy duty oyster style bracelet with brushed side links and polished center links. So obviously that's going to, give it a little bit of bling on the side. Speaks to the concept. I would personally rather it be all brushed because I just don't like too much bling on my watches. And a bracelet like this can add actually quite a lot. Don't underestimate it. But it does flow into the case nicely here. So you have the brushed kind of going out to the sides and then the polish going up into the bezel. So that does, kind of makes sense. The clasp, very standard dive clasp here, folds over, opens up. It's a buckle we've seen many times before. It works. Nothing to say too much about that. In conclusion, the Melbourne Sorrento, I think, is a successful first stab for the brand at doing kind of a heavier sport watch. Like I said before, most of their watches were pretty elegant. I guess they had one or two aggressive pilot watches before, but this to me definitely stands out. It speaks more to the aesthetic that they've been kind of growing based on that Portsea model, which, like I said, was very successful. So I like to see that they're taking from that and kind of building it into maybe more of a brand aesthetic rather than just something from that line, because this is something that I think that they could go very far with. It's a nice look. It's definitely dressed up and elegant, and it's different from what other micro brands and frankly not micro brands are doing. Just the mix of textures and colors and materials, etc. I think it's a very smart design. Here on the dive watch, it's a curious creation to have this kind of watch that's very beefy and tooly in some ways and dressy in other ways, but it's not unappealing at all. I think it's definitely going to make sense for a lot of people who want something that's a little bit more classically refined in a dive watch, as I said before, and one with perhaps some color. There are other versions of this, black and white, which will be different from the blue and perhaps a little bit more simple and understated. But the blue is definitely attractive, especially that bezel, that engraved bezel. Very cool feature there. And I think, if I were to kind of sum up what I like, things like that bezel, things like the ceramic on the dial, those are just not elements that you see many people playing with. So it's great to see a microbrand kind of pushing forward in that space. Once again, it's powered by a Miyota 9015 movement. So it's a movement we've seen a lot, very good movement. It's going to run well. and it's priced at $842. That is, perhaps a little bit on the high side for, what people are seeing right now for the 9015s. I don't think it's unfair at all. It's just definitely at the top of that range. But for the pre-sale, it is available at $612, so that is, well incentivized. So yeah, please read the full review on Worn&Wound. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Thank you.